family therapy exercises come in all shapes and sizes, but ideally, as a therapist, you want to have in your back pocket a family therapy exercise that engages everyone in the family, but also one that helps the family in some way, potentially by pointing out the things that need to change. Best of all, in a family therapy session, you want an exercise that helps you out, and perhaps even one that helps you create a treatment plan, or at least gives you an idea of where to go with the family in future sessions. I've been using all kinds of family therapy exercises over the past 10 years of my career, and this is absolutely my favorite. Now, if we've not met before, my name is Oliver, and I'm a marriage and family therapist here in Los Angeles, and I'm a bit of a family systems nerd. If you're very new to family systems therapy, I'll put links to other videos below. And if you want even more family systems, check out Family Systems Step by Step. It's an online course I created in family therapy that takes you through everything I do from the very first phone call through to the family exercises and interventions that I use. The family therapy exercise I'm going to explain today is a combination of structural family systems, psychodrama, with a bit of a psychoanalytic influence. Let's do the basics of what a family map is. You probably know what a genogram is. This is the structural family systems equivalent of it, except it's much simpler and more fun, and it's kind of cooler. Everybody gets a square to represent them, or a rectangle. I use these envelopes all the time, and very useful, quite cheap on Amazon, and different colors as well, which we'll get into later. Everybody in the family gets a square, and you use whatever surface is available to you. I use that little coffee table back there, and you get the person who's mapping the family to arrange the squares or envelopes as they see fit. Now, for therapists, it's a little more complicated because we have an ideal vision of what a healthy family looks like, and that is 2 parents at the top, because height to us represents authority or power, and we want adults to be in charge. We're all thinking about distance. What does distance represent? So how close or far apart these rectangles or squares are might mean something about how close or distant people are in the family. So this is a family of 4, and the presenting problem that they came in with was to do with conflict between the IP, who is a teenage boy of 16, and his father. I actually got a lot of information from the family consultation call. So already I'm thinking in my head of a hypothesis based on that limited amount of information that I got. So as a structural family therapist, a hypothesis is to have something in my mind to test against. And one of the ways that I conceptualize conflict is to do with very rigid boundaries between the IP and his father or a parent. Sometimes the IP takes on a bit of a rebellious role with the distant father who doesn't communicate well, or who enforces too many rules, or is too authoritarian and emotionally distant. But as I was listening to this family, I realized that wasn't right. But that is the beauty of hypotheses, right? We come up with an idea, come up with a hypothesis, and we're totally okay if we're wrong. We're not attached to it. We don't need to be right. We just hold it loosely and are ready to throw it away if it doesn't fit with what we see. So my next hypothesis considered if there were porous boundaries between the parent and sibling subsystem. Sometimes when there's conflict within a family, it's to do with the behaviors of the IP who's got too much power, too much influence, and he's kind of running the household, making demands, becoming aggressive, or perhaps even emotionally manipulative to maintain that power. But that didn't fit either. It seemed more to do with dad constantly nagging his son, and not actually to do with the son disrespecting rules or making demands or having any sense of entitlement around privileges or consequences. To make things worse, the family was a bit rigid in their thinking, and they weren't really able to think systemically about how people interacting with each other in the family might contribute to conflict or might cause the symptoms. Circular questioning, perhaps my second favorite tool, was only getting me so far, and I was struggling a bit. So eventually I realized I should pull out some projective cards, and these are just random images I've either made or found online. And this is something that I did all the time when I was running a residential treatment center. And if you don't really know what a projective technique is or how to use it, it's really simple. So all you have to do is tell me what is going on in this image. And I've done this countless times with students, other therapists, and I get all kinds of reactions. The best one ever, though, was that one of my colleagues said that there are two guys whispering to each other about robbing a bank and they're discussing how much money is in the vault. Someone else said it was a father and son. There's really no wrong answer, but there is actually a right answer, because what is actually going on in this image can only be deduced from the facts, and the facts are that two formally dressed men are depicted. One appears to be older. That is it. Anything else that you put into your story, you're making up. The reason that you're making things up is because there's not a lot of detail there. I'm asking you to engage your imagination, and you pull things up from your unconscious to fill in the story and tell me what's going on. So I'm forcing you really to go into the back of your brain and make up a story. But what else is in the back of your brain? All of your memories and experiences from your past. So the story you create to fill in the gaps on this picture say more about you than it does what's actually going on in this picture, because the only thing we know for a fact about this picture is that there are two formally dressed men, one of which appears to be older. What's important here is the extent to which you elaborated on the story reveals more about you than it does the image. So projected techniques is just about filling in the gaps with our own stuff. And as therapists, that stuff that we come up with is really important stuff, because it's not things that our clients consciously have access to. So they're revealing more about themselves or what they think about other people. And that is the power of these projective techniques. So I started with the IP, which is not normally something that I do, but his role as the IP wasn't too centralized or too negative. So I think I got away with it. When a family comes in and the IP is the focus of all of their concerns or all of their problems, or the problem in our family is that person, and then you go ahead and start focusing your attention on the IP or getting them to go first in an exercise, you're reinforcing the idea that the IP is the problem. So just be aware of that. This teenager went first and he chose various images to represent each person in the family. And I'm going to explain them all to you now. So he chose this image of a fighter for himself, and he said, it's because I'm always fighting for attention and fighting to be heard. No surprises there. This is an angry kid, but I still didn't really get a sense of what was making him so angry or why he found things so irritating. He chose this image for his mother, and this to me looks like a woman that is very busy, maybe distracted. He kind of explained that to me too. He chose this photo because, yes, she's busy and she's running around doing house things and parent things. But what I found out was that actually she was very preoccupied with his sister, which I hadn't really picked up on in the rest of the questioning. And as for his sister, he chose a teddy bear. And this is a great example of why you're going to ask the client why they chose the card and what the image means to them. Because for me, it's a cute teddy bear, and I might assume that it's a reference to having a cute little sister. This client had a lot more to say about the image, though. He explained to me that he sees teddy bears or stuffed animals as being needy, or I think perhaps he said useless. And then he went on to explain that they kind of don't do anything. It's not like a battery-operated toy or a video game. You have to do things with them. Otherwise, they just sit on the shelf and do nothing. I think it was his way of telling me how needy or how dependent his sister was. So already I'm getting a lot out of these images. And the image he chose for his father was a man shouting on a box with a megaphone. It looks to me like a bossy person, and basically, that's what this client said, but he elaborated more and told me that his dad was always telling him what to do and he's got to help around the house or do the dishes. This was an image of a nagging father. When I got him to rearrange the shapes so that it represented how he felt about family relationships, things got even more clear for me. It turns out that this was a real shortcut to me realizing what was actually going on in the family. And it would have taken me much longer without this family therapy exercise. What I didn't realize was just how involved Mum and his sister were. The neediness of his sister was in part due to her needing lots of extra help with school, with homework, and things like that. There was some dyslexia, I think, or a learning disadvantage, but there was also lots of enmeshment. Mum was overly involved with that kid, but not without reason. Either way, his family portrait showed me that his sister kind of took mum out of the picture when it came to his life. His dad was at the very top of the image still, but it seems that it actually had more distance between him and his dad than I was imagining. I think his family portrait was explaining that he felt almost neglected or unseen at the very least. And I noticed again that Dad wasn't off to the side, he hadn't disappeared completely. He was kind of in this position of authority at the top of the image, kind of implying that Dad was present, but maybe not engaged, or at least not engaged in the way that this teenager needed. So then I became very curious about what images everyone else would choose. And we did the exact same exercise, picking cards to represent each family member and then rearranging them to reflect the family in a way that feels right to each member. So I won't bore you with the full family portraits of each family member, but here's the cliff notes. So I think what's perhaps most interesting is the images that the family members chose for the father. I asked Mum to go first and she chose these images of the jigsaw puzzles, and in our discussion, it became clear that she was kind of alluding to this idea that he completes her, that she's incomplete without him. It's a very romantic notion, but also speaks to a lot of inequality in the relationship. Ideally, we enter a relationship and we're fully complete, healthy human beings, and we find a partner that complements us, not completes us. And whenever there's this imbalance in a relationship, there's distance. And when there's distance, it means someone's higher than you, and that makes you lower than them. That is a relationship imbalance that perhaps needs some further exploration. She was implying that she didn't just see her husband as a partner. He was the breadwinner, the partner, the therapist, the co-parent, the best friend, everything. The younger sister chose this image to represent her father. And I asked if that was because Dad works a lot. She agreed quite proudly, saying that he's busy running 2 businesses and helping Mum and being a dad. This guy works a lot. Now, side note here, it's not necessarily a rule of thumb, but often the youngest child, if they're not the IP, will tell the truth about what's going on in a family. They will dish all of the dirt in a very innocent way. She also positioned her and Mum being very close, mentioning how her and her mum were best friends. And Dad was actually beneath everyone because she explained that he was supporting everyone, he was carrying everyone. So I'm picking up on this idea that although the family elected the eldest son to be the IP, I think Dad is the one who's really struggling in this family. So then I asked Dad to pick an image for himself, and he chose this picture of a knight. And these images, again, mean different things to different people. For me, my associations are something about this being someone who is emotionless or hollow. Like, we don't really know if anyone is in there. Is it a tin man, or is there actually somebody behind that mask? For other people and other families that I've worked with, this represents to them someone who's guarded or defensive. But in this family, the father explains that he would have chosen a robot if that was an option. He said he felt robotic in some ways. He said he feels like a machine, supporting everyone, putting out fires with his son, having to support his wife, having to help his employees, and then fixing issues at the company and supporting his daughter. He said that there's not much left of me at the end of the day, and half of the time I feel like I'm on autopilot. So when he created his family portrait, his version wasn't too far off from his daughter's. He put himself on the bottom of the image, and then, quite sadly, he put everybody else on top of him. And when he explained it, he said, yeah, I feel like I'm carrying everyone. I feel smothered. I feel overwhelmed. I can't get a break, and I feel like I'm drowning. This family portrait helped me with treatment because it started with me asking, how can I get you from the image you've created here to a healthy family structure, which looks ideally a bit more like this? So number one, this man needed some space. He feels smothered. How do we give him some room to decompress and breathe? Number two, closely associated with this, he's got to work on his boundaries. He's got to stop assuming that he's got to rescue everyone. And that image of the knight was something so useful and so profound, we came back to it a lot. If you think about it, the knight in shining armor is the hero that comes to save people. But we can't assume that everyone around us needs saving. Sure, it's noble and gallant and loving, but If that knight thinks everybody needs rescuing and that's his job to do the rescuing, this is someone who's going to be burnt out, make mistakes, become resentful, irritable, and cranky real quickly. Unconsciously, thanks to these projective family therapy exercises, he had revealed a bit of a savior complex. Now, my favorite Brené Brown quote is something like, "The most loving people are the most boundaried people." And she's saying that actually it's an act of love to say no sometimes, to hold back. In his image choice, he revealed he really needed some help saying no and setting limits and not always being so reactive to help people. A family doesn't really get into this position with healthy boundaries. So there was something about these porous boundaries in the family that was enabling him to take on too much, assuming he couldn't say no. Associated with this, I needed to help him with communication, direct and clear communication, asking for space if he needs it, or asking for help, which is different from demanding that his son help him. Number 4, I think part of the conflict with his son was due to the demands he put on his kid to help around the house and be a man. It's not entirely inappropriate or unhealthy, but I think his son also had different needs that weren't being met, right? I really had to help renegotiate their relationship in some ways, perhaps inserting quality time, fun time, trying to balance nurturing and care with, "Hey buddy, I really need your help looking after your sister or doing the dishes." There has to be balance. It can't all be work. And if it is all demands, then yeah, that leads to a very irritable teenager. Number 5, I think there was something going on with him and his wife that he needed to look at. She had him on a bit of a pedestal, a bit idealized. If one person is your best friend and your therapist and your husband and your lover and your co-parent and the breadwinner, it's too much for one person. She needed to expand her support system so that it gave the husband more space, but also giving her more variety and more support and more options. If you want to know more about stuff like this, I would love it if you checked out either of the 2 courses I've mentioned. I've got one that goes into a lot more detail in family mapping. I call it advanced family mapping, although it's not particularly advanced. It's just lots of different varieties of family mapping that you can use in different situations. And if you want to learn more about family systems, check out Family Systems Step by Step. It's how I work with a family from a structural, strategic standpoint, from the very first phone call all the way through to what interventions and what family therapy exercises I use.